Welcome back to the Linux Academy Nginx Deep Dive. We're going to talk about HTTP for the moment because this is going to be the main protocol that's going to be used throughout our time working with Nginx, and I want everybody to have a little bit of a background as to what HTTP is and kind of how it works before we get started. So HTTP stands for Hypertext Transfer Protocol, and it's really the language of the internet. It's what we sort of run into anytime we're making web requests in our browser. You utilize it with something like curl, but it's the application layer protocol built on top of TCP/IP. So TCP/IP is going to be the transport level protocol. So that's going to be how we're shipping packets and data over the internet. And then we're going to utilize HTTP to kind of tell the server or service on the other side of a request what we want it to do. So this is the language that two programs are going to speak to each other to kind of display their intent, if you will. And as a protocol, HTTP defines how that information gets sent over. That way, you can implement servers for it and you can implement clients for it. HTTPS, on the other hand, is Hypertext Transfer Protocol Secure, and this is really just HTTP with another layer in there for TLS and SSL. TLS being the modern version that we utilize, SSL being the precursor for TLS. And this is where you get HTTPS and the green lock in your browser, and how do you know that the content that you're working with is going to be encrypted when speaking between the client and the server. One of the main ways that we interact with HTTP is by utilizing a URL, and if you've never broken down a URL into its components, we can kind of do that now, but the first part is going to be the protocol that you're speaking. So when you see HTTP:// you know that we're speaking HTTP. And if we wanted this to use encryption, we would use HTTPS because it's a separate protocol that can also handle the TLS SSL layer. After that, we're going to have your host name, which is going to be either a domain or an IP address. And then there can be an optional port. And if the port's not there, it's going to assume a default port based on whatever the protocol is. So the default port for HTTP is going to be 80. HTTPS is going to use 443. If you were using something completely different and you were speaking, say, to a Postgres server, you could use the Postgres protocol and it would have its own default port. And then after the port, you're going to run into the path and the file name. So everything up to the last section of that is going to be the path, and then the final bit, in this case the 1, would be the name of the resource. So that would be the file name. And if you're just working with static content, this is going to be based on whatever the server's root is. So the virtual host's root location, it'll be relative to that. And we'll see this throughout the course as we put things into /var/www/name of our website. Anytime you were to request the name of your website domain, then it would give you the path relative to that exact folder in our server. In terms of actually looking at what HTTP is as a protocol, we don't normally see it in this format, but if you want to dump this out of curl, you can actually see what's going on here. But you're going to have a verb, a destination, and the actual type that you're using there. So the protocol, get in this case, is going to be the method or verb that we're working with. And then our URI, which is going to be the path portion of what we had in our URL. After the first line of the request, we're going to see a lot of things that are kind of key value pairs in a way, but it's going to be something on the left-hand side of a colon. That's going to be the header name, and then there's going to be a colon, and then everything on the right-hand side of that is going to be the header value. So in this case, we have a host header that is going to blog.example.com, and this was me manually setting a header using curl, even though I was going to the IP address of 127.0.0.1. And then the user agent was curl. That was the tool that I was using. And then it has an accept it header, which means it can accept any content type back. And there's one thing that you can't see here, and that is the last part of the request is going to be a blank line because you put individual headers on their own lines. And then to signify that you're done with the request, you would have a blank line at the very end. So this is what I sent off to a server. And the response that I get back looks like this, including the headers up top. So these are response headers. And that's going with the protocol, and then a status, which is 200 OK. And then we have our headers being server, Nginx with a version number, the date, content type. And some of these are going to go in and actually be custom headers that we added, like the X powered by, saying that it's utilizing PHP on the back end. And then there's going to be a blank line, and then you'll see the actual body of the response. So This is where if you make a request for an HTML page, you get the HTML page, but you also got all these headers, which gave you this information. So this is really how the browsers that we utilize on websites that we go to, this is how they speak. They speak over HTTP, starting with a URL, going into an HTTP request, and then eventually getting an HTTP response back.